The beast had not moved in 4 days, and now it was moving. Cadet Yurev felt the tremor before anyone spoke, a low pulse through the observation deck's plating, the kind of vibration that came up through the soles of the boots and settled in the back teeth. Down in the pit, behind 3 hands' width of blast glass and a lattice of tension cabling that could hold a dropship in place, the thing the wardens called the specimen had risen from its corner. It had not risen for food. It had not risen for the goad. It rose now, slow, its ash-gray shoulders rolling under plated hide, and it turned its great split jaw toward the gallery and fixed all 6 of its amber eyes on a single point. Yurev followed the line of that stare and found at the end of it the new one, the human. The gallery went silent the way a struck bell goes silent. All at once, the sound sucked out of the room. 40 cadets stood at the rail. Warden Master Kavin stood at the center of them with his claws folded behind his spine back, and even he had stopped mid-sentence. The human did not notice. That was the thing Yurev would remember for the rest of his life, when he was old and telling this badly to cubs who would not believe him. The human did not notice that death itself had turned to look at him. Owen Marsh stood at the rail with his hands loose at his sides, his plain, soft face tilted a little, watching the beast the way a person watches weather, not afraid, not thrilled, just looking. "Down," Kavin said quietly, to no one to the animal. It was an old warden's reflex, the word that had broken 1,000 Deathworld beasts on this station over 90 years. Down. The beast did not go down. It took a step toward the glass. Yurev's spines flattened against his neck. He heard the cadet beside him, Dreven. Of course it was Dreven, let out a soft, breathless laugh. The laugh a predator makes when it thinks it is about to watch something die and be glad of it. "It's going to open him up," Dreven murmured. "Watch." It picked the softest one in the room. That was the doctrine, and every thread on that deck had been raised on it. A Deathworld apex, brought in wild and kept unbroken, would always mark the weakest thing in its sightline. It was how they tested nerve. It was how they built wardens. You stood at the rail while the specimen decided who among you smelled most like prey, and you learned to be anyone but that one. In 9 years, the specimen had marked 41 cadets. 9 of them had never worn the collar cord again. The station kept their names on a wall no one liked to walk past. And now it had marked the human, the harmless one, the one who had arrived 2 weeks ago on a supply hauler with a single soft bag and a way of standing that made you forget he was there. The beast pressed its broad skull against the blast glass. The whole pit rang with it. Cadets flinched back from the rail as though the glass had already failed. Somewhere an alarm began to chime, low and patient, and the tension cables sang as the winch brains took up slack. Owen Marsh did not flinch. He leaned forward instead. He put one bare human hand flat against the rail, not the glass. He wasn't a fool, just the rail, and he looked down into 6 amber eyes the size of dinner plates, and he did something no one on that deck had ever seen anyone do in front of the specimen. He softened. His shoulders came down. His jaw came loose. The little tension that lives in every living body when it stands near a killing thing simply left him, the way it leaves a man who has come home. And Yurev, who was close enough to hear it, heard the human speak, not loud, not a command, nothing like the words the warden shouted. Just a low, worn smooth murmur, the kind you'd use on a spooked draft animal in the dark. "Hey," Owen said, "hey. There you are." The beast stopped pressing on the glass. It did not go down and it did not turn away. It stood with its skull against the barrier and its terrible split jaw a hand's width from the human's face, and it went still, a different stillness than the stalking stillness. A stillness Yurev had no name for and Kavin had no doctrine for. The alarm chimed on. The cables sang. 40 cadets held their breath. And the apex of the Deathworld v. Harris, the specimen, the widow that had killed 9 wardens and been broken by none, closed its 6 eyes and leaned its weight. Gently, gently, a mountain setting itself down into the glass between it and the harmless new human, and let out a long, low sound that was not a growl. "That's not possible," Dreven said. His voice had lost its laugh. Warden Master Kavin said nothing at all. But Uriv saw the old warden's claws, folded behind his back, tighten until the knuckle plates went pale, and Uriv understood. In the cold way you understand a thing you will spend years pretending you didn't, that the warden master was not amazed. He was afraid. Owen Marsh had come to Warden's Reach because it was the farthest posting his transfer papers would reach, and because it had beasts. That was the whole of it, though the intake officer had wanted more. She had been a lean gray Thren with a clerk's soft spines and a suspicious manner, and she had turned his single soft bag inside out on the counter and found nothing in it but clothes, a water skin, a folding knife with a worn bone handle, and a flat stone he wouldn't explain. "Purpose of transfer," she'd said for the third time. "I like animals," Owen had said. "I heard you had big ones." She had stared at him. Humans were rare this far out on the Thren frontier, a curiosity, a soft pink thing that the compact treaties said you had to house and feed and could not eat. She'd clearly expected a soldier, or a scientist, or at least someone who could hold her gaze like he meant it. Instead, she'd gotten this. A young man, barely past his growing, with a plain round face and calm brown eyes and hands that were rough in the palm and gentle in the way they moved. He'd smiled at her the way you smile at someone doing a hard job on a long day, and she had not known what to do with that either. "You understand what this station is," she'd said. "This is a warden school. We take the worst things the Deathworlds make and we teach cadets to master them. You are not a cadet. You have no standing. You'll be housed as a treaty guest and you will stay behind the yellow line in every pen. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Owen had said. "The animals here are not pets, human. They will kill you and feel nothing." "I know," Owen had said, and something in the way he said it, quiet, certain, not a boast and not a fear, just a fact he'd carried a long way, had made her stop and look at him again. But he'd only picked up his folded knife and his flat stone and put them back in his bag, and asked, very politely, where he could find the pens. Uriv had been the one assigned to walk him there. Uriv was the smallest cadet in his cohort and the worst at the dominance drills, a runt with undersized spines who flinched at loud noises, and had already, privately, decided he was going to fail out and be sent home to crew a hauler. He'd been given the human because minding the treaty guest was a chore nobody wanted, a mark of low standing, and Uriv had low standing to spare. He had expected to hate it. Instead, he had walked the human down the long gantry over the north pens, and the human had stopped at every rail. Not to gawk, to look. Owen had leaned on the rail above the mire where the tuskers wallowed, great flat-bodied things with grinding jaws that could take a Thren's arm off at the shoulder, and he'd watched them the way Uriv's grandsire used to watch the tide, with a patience that had no wanting in it. He'd asked their names. He'd asked what they ate, and when they slept, and whether the big scarred one in the corner was the mother. He'd asked why the pen was so bright and so loud, and Uriv had said, "Because the doctrine says a beast kept off balance is a beast half broken," and Owen had said, "Huh," and not argued, but Uriv had seen him look at the scarred mother in the corner for a long time. "She's tired," Owen had said. "She's dangerous," Uriv had corrected, reciting. "Sure," Owen had said, "she's both." By the end of that first walk, 3 separate beasts that had never quieted for a keeper in their lives had drifted to the near rail when Owen passed, and stood there, watching him go. Uriv had not understood it. He'd filed it under the way strange things happen around strangers, and he'd gone to sleep that night without knowing he had just met the most dangerous person ever to set foot on Warden's Reach. They gave Owen a bunk in the treaty guest cell off the mess, and for 2 weeks he was nearly invisible, which suited everyone. He rose before the station lights came up. He ate what he was given without complaint, though he set aside the raw strips they served the cadets and ate only the grain mash. And once, When Dreven's clutchmates noticed and jeered that the human ate slave food, Owen had only said mildly that where he was from you didn't eat a thing you might have to work beside, and gone back to his bowl. He kept to the gantries. He learned the North Pens and then the West, and the keepers, who were the lowest-ranked staff on the station and used to being ignored, found themselves talking to him, because he asked the questions no warden ever asked. Not how do you break it? How does it sleep? What does it do when it thinks no one is watching? The keepers liked him. The cadets did not think about him at all, except Dreven, who thought about everyone he might one day need to step on. Dreven Saul was the top of the senior cohort and the son of a warden line that went back to the founding of the Reach. He was long and dark-spined and beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, and he had never in his life met a thing he could not dominate, not a beast, not a cadet, not a keeper. He had noticed the human on the first day and dismissed him on the second, and it was the dismissal that would eat at him later, because Dreven Saul did not like to be shown that his instincts could be wrong. It was Dreven who arranged, on the 14th day, for the human to be at the rail for the reckoning. The reckoning was the station's oldest rite and its cruelest. Once a season, the senior cohort was marched to the gallery above the deep pit, and the specimen was roused, and each cadet stood at the rail in turn while the apex of Harmless looked them over and decided what they were. It was meant to teach the thing that could not be taught in drills, how to stand your ground with your death looking back at you. Passing was simple. You stood. You did not run. You did not void yourself. You met the 6 amber eyes, and you did not become prey in your own heart, because the beast could smell the moment you did. Dreven had passed his first reckoning at the head of his cohort. He intended to pass this one the same way, and he intended, as a small private pleasure, to see the soft human at the rail beside him break, to see the treaty guest who ate slave food and talked to keepers finally show what he was, which was nothing, which was prey. So Dreven had gone to the duty warden and suggested, with the easy charm of a favored son, that it would be instructive for the human to witness a reckoning. Character building, he'd said. Let the soft thing see what real wardens face. The duty warden, who owed Dreven's father a favor and feared Dreven's future, had signed the chit. That was how Owen Marsh came to be standing at the rail of the deep pit on the day the specimen rose, after 4 days of not moving, and crossed the whole floor of its cell, and pressed its skull to the glass, and chose him. Explain it, Warden Master Cavin said. The gallery had been cleared. The cadets were gone, herded out by junior wardens with the reckoning unfinished and the doctrine visibly cracked, and that alone had never happened in the 90-year history of the Reach. Now the deck held only Cavin, 2 senior wardens whose names Uriv did not know, the human and Uriv himself, who had been too slow to leave and then too frightened to move and was now pressed into the corner by the lift, praying to be forgotten. Below, the specimen had not returned to its corner. It lay against the glass directly beneath the rail where Owen stood, its great flanks rising and falling, its 6 eyes half-lidded, and every few breaths it made that low sound again, the sound with no name. Explain what, sir? Owen said. Cavin turned on him. The warden master was old for a Thren, his spines gone gray and brittle at the tips, his hide seamed with the pale scars of 100 beasts that had tried to kill him and failed. He had broken the specimen's own dam, 9 years gone, had stood in the ash plains of Harmless over the carcass of the greatest predator that world had ever grown and taken its last living calf in a net, and named it his masterwork, and spent 9 years failing to make it kneel. He was not a cruel person, Uriv would come to understand. He was worse than cruel. He was certain. He had built his whole long life on a single idea, that the will of a Thren warden was the highest thing in the galaxy, and that any beast, given enough fear and enough time, would bend to it, and he had just watched a soft pink human undo that idea with the word hey. That animal, Cavin said, has killed 9 of my wardens. It has broken the arms of 2 more and taken the eye of a 3rd. It does not eat when I wish it to eat. It does not sleep when I wish it to sleep. In 9 years I have not made it lower its head 1 finger's width, and it just laid itself down at your feet like a whelp at its dam's teat. His voice did not rise. That was the frightening thing. "Explain it, human. What did you do?" Owen looked down at the beast. The beast looked up at Owen, and Yuriv watched the human's plain face do something complicated and quiet, not smug, not triumphant, just a little sad. "I didn't do anything," Owen said. "That's the whole thing. You've all been doing so much." He crouched down by the rail, easy, his forearms on his knees, bringing his face closer to the glass and the great skull behind it. "You keep the lights up so it can't rest. You keep the pit loud so it can't think. You send men down with goads to remind it every day that it's a prisoner. You've spent 9 years telling this animal it's the most dangerous thing you've ever seen." He tilted his head. "And I walked in and I didn't tell it that, that's all. I just looked at it like it was somebody, and it's been so long since anybody looked at it like it was somebody that it—" He stopped. His throat moved. "It came to see who did it." "That is sentiment," said one of the senior wardens. "The beast marked him as prey. It is the largest target on the deck. It will." The specimen lifted its head off the floor and looked at the senior warden. Just looked. The warden stopped talking. "It's not going to hurt him," Owen said, still gently, still to the glass. "It's not going to hurt anybody who doesn't earn it. It never was. It's not a monster." He put his palm flat on the rail. Below, the beast's split jaw parted, and a huge dark tongue rasped once against the inside of the glass, right beneath Owen's hand, as if it could taste him through 3 hands' width of blast plate. "It's just the last of something, and it's been alone in a bright room for 9 years. Kevin stared at the human for a long, long moment. "Get it up," he said at last. "Rouse it, full goad. I want it on its feet and I want it away from that glass." The 2 senior wardens hesitated. "Master." Now, Yuriv would remember what happened next in pieces, because his mind, in the moment, refused to hold it whole. The winch brains woke the pit's goad array, a ring of shock lances on articulated arms that descended from the ceiling of the cell, arcing blue, the same array that had roused the specimen 10,000 times in 9 years and driven it snarling to its corner. The lances came down. The blue arc snapped and spat. And the specimen did not go to its corner. It rose, all of it, the full impossible mass of it, plated shoulders higher than a Thren stood tall, and it put its own body between the goad array and the glass beneath Owen. It took the lances on its own armored back, the arcs cracking white against its ash-gray hide, and it did not snarl and it did not flee. It planted its 4 feet over the spot where the human crouched above it, and it lowered its terrible head, and it held, shielding a patch of empty floor, shielding the place beneath the human's hand. "Turn it off," Owen said. He had come off his crouch. For the first time since he'd arrived on Warden's Reach, there was an edge in his voice, not loud but flat and hard as a blade laid on a table. "Turn it off right now." "It will learn," Kevin said, watching, "that its new attachment brings pain. It will learn to keep its distance from." "You're not hurting it to teach it," Owen said. "You're hurting it to hurt me. Turn it off." The old warden's head came around slow. And Yuriv, in his corner, understood that the human had seen, faster and cleaner than any Thren on that deck, exactly what the warden master was doing and exactly why. The lances arced. The great beast held its shield over the empty floor and made the low sound, over and over, not a growl, a call. The sound a thing makes when it is telling someone it loves that everything is all right, that it can take this, that they should not be afraid. Kevin looked at that for the length of 3 breaths. Then he lifted one claw, and the goat array went dark and rose back into the ceiling, and the pit was quiet except for the low call of the beast and the ragged breathing of the wardens. "Clear the deck," Kevin said. "The human stays away from the pit. Post a guard on the treaty cell." He was already walking to the lift. At the doors he paused, and without turning he said, in a voice Yuriv had to strain to hear, "And send to the spire. Tell them the specimen is compromised. Tell them we will need a disposal warrant." The lift doors closed on him. Below, the beast lay back down beneath the glass, in the place where the human had been, and settled its great skull on its forefeet, and waited for him to come back. Uriv, forgotten in his corner, looked at the human, and found the human already looking at him. "Disposal warrant," Owen said quietly. "What's that mean?" Uriv's throat was dry. He should not answer. He was a cadet. The human was a treaty guest. The warden master had given an order. But he thought of the scarred Mother Tusker in the corner of the north pen, and the wall of names no one liked to walk past, and the way the great beast in the pit had taken the lances on its own back rather than let them fall on an empty patch of floor a human had touched. "It means they're going to kill it," Uriv said. Owen Marsh nodded slowly, like a man hearing a thing he'd already known was coming. "No," he said, "they're not." The disposal warrant would take 9 days to travel to the Thren Spire and back. Owen learned this from Uriv, who learned it from a keeper, who learned it from the duty clerk who had transcribed Cavin's message. On a station like Warden's Reach, where the warden spoke only to wardens, the lowest people knew everything, because the lowest people were always in the room when the high ones forgot to notice them. 9 days. Owen did the arithmetic without any change in his face, and then he asked Uriv a question that the young cadet would turn over for a long time afterward. "Who feeds it?" They were in the treaty cell. A junior warden stood outside the door with a shock baton and a bored expression, posted there to keep the human away from the pit, which struck Uriv as the wrong way around. The door did not seem to be keeping the human in so much as keeping everyone else out of the human's business. Owen sat on the edge of his bunk with his flat gray stone in his hands, turning it, the way some people turn a coin. "Feeds what?" Uriv said. "The specimen." "It has a name," Owen said. "You just haven't given it one." He turned the stone. "Who feeds it?" "The pit crew. They drop meat through the top chute. Nobody goes in." Uriv shifted his weight. "Nobody has ever gone in. There's a keeper, old Bran at West Pens. He was on the capture. He says even the crew that netted it lost 2 before they got the collar cord on the dam." He hesitated. "Human. Owen, you should not be asking these things. When the warrant comes." "When the warrant comes, they'll gas the pit," Owen said. It was not a guess. It had the flatness of a thing he'd seen done before. "That's how you do a big one you can't get close to. You seal the room and you fill it with something that puts it to sleep, and then something that stops the sleep from ending. It's clean. Nobody has to go in. Nobody has to look at it." He set the stone down on his knee. "That's the part they like, that nobody has to look at it." Uriv did not know what to say. He was 19 station years old, and he had been raised to believe that the mastery of Deathworld beasts was the noblest work a Thren could do. And in 2 weeks, a soft-handed human had made him feel, for the first time, that the whole edifice he'd been climbing was built over something rotten. "Why do you care?" Uriv said finally. It came out smaller than he meant. "It's not yours. You've been here 14 days. Owen was quiet for a moment. "When I was a kid," he said, "my people kept guardian beasts, big ones bred down from something that used to be wild back before we settled. We put them out with the herds at night to keep the ripperpacks off. And there was one, a big old bull we called Marrow, meanest thing you ever saw, scarred all up one side. Everybody was scared of him. My father wouldn't let the little ones near him." He turned the stone over. "And one winter Marrow got hung up in the wire on the high pasture, tore himself half to pieces trying to get loose, and by the time we found him he was so far gone with fear and pain he'd have killed anything that came close. My father wanted to put him down, said he was too dangerous, said he'd turned. And I was, I don't know, 11, and I didn't have a reason, I just didn't believe it. So while they were arguing I walked up the pasture and I sat down in the snow a little way off from him. Didn't touch him, didn't talk at him, just sat down where he could see me and I let him watch me not be afraid." He looked up at Uriv and there was nothing dramatic in his face, nothing that asked to be admired. "Took about 2 hours. Then he stopped screaming. And after a while, he let me get the wire off him." "And then," Uriv breathed. And then he was Marrow again, Owen said. Meanest thing you ever saw. Killed a Ripper Pack Alpha that spring on his own in the dark and lived 9 more years and died in the sun in the yard. But he never once turned on a person after that. Not once. He picked the stone back up. You don't break a thing that's already been broken by being alive, Yuriv. You just have to be the one who doesn't add to it. Out in the corridor, the junior warden shifted his weight and yawned. The stone, Yuriv said. You never told the intake officer what it was. What is it? Owen closed his hand around it. It's from the pasture, he said. Where Marrow died, I picked it up out of the yard. He almost smiled. It's just a rock, but I like to have a piece of home in a place like this. Reminds me what I'm for. He got out of the treaty cell that night, which should have been impossible, and was not, because Warden's Reach had been built to keep beasts in and had never once had to keep a human anywhere. Owen did not fight the guard or fool the lock. He simply waited until the station dimmed to its night cycle, and then he asked the junior warden, through the door, whether he might use the sanitation block down the hall, and the junior warden, who had been told to keep the human away from the pit, and had heard nothing about the sanitation block, unlocked the door and walked him down the corridor. And on the way back, Owen stopped at the junction where the maintenance gantry branched off toward the deep pit, and he said in his mild way, "You've been standing a long time. I'm going to be a while. Go sit down. I'll knock when I'm done." And the junior warden, who was tired and bored and could not imagine the soft treaty guest doing anything worth guarding against, went and sat down. Yuriv knew this because Yuriv had followed him. He could not have said why. He had lain in his bunk after the human story about the guardian beast and found he could not sleep, and when he'd heard the treaty cell door open, he'd slipped out after it, keeping to the shadows the way a runt learns to keep to shadows, and he'd watched the human peel off from his guard as easy as breathing and go down the dark maintenance gantry toward the one place on the station he'd been forbidden to go. Yuriv followed him all the way to the deep pit. The gallery was empty and unlit, the great blast glass a wall of gray murk, but the human did not go to the gallery. He went to the maintenance stair that spiraled down the outside of the cell, the stair the pit crew used to reach the top chute, the meat drop, and he climbed it, quiet and sure in the dark, and Yuriv, heart hammering against his undersized spines, climbed after him. At the top of the cell was a steel walkway and the chute hatch, and beside the hatch a wider service port, sealed, that the capture crew had once used to lower equipment. It was locked with a keeper's cylinder lock, the old kind, the kind that any keeper on the station could open and no warden bothered to learn. Owen took from his pocket a keeper's cylinder key. Yuriv would find out later that old Brannet of the West Pens had pressed it into the human's hand that afternoon and said nothing, and that this was the bravest thing a keeper had done on Warden's Reach in 40 years. And he opened the service port, and he looked down into the dark of the pit. "Owen," Yuriv whispered before he could stop himself. The human did not startle. He looked back over his shoulder, unsurprised, as if he'd known the cadet was there the whole climb, and maybe he had. "You should go back to your bunk," Owen said. "This part's mine." "It'll kill you," Yuriv's voice shook. "The moment you're in there with it, with nothing between you, the doctrine says." "The doctrine's been wrong about this animal for 9 years. Owen swung one leg over the lip of the port. Below, in the dark, something vast shifted, and 6 amber points opened in the black and turned up toward the sound of his voice, and the low call rolled up out of the pit and filled the whole cell like water filling a cup. "You hear that?" Owen said softly. "That's not a hunting sound. I've never once heard it make a hunting sound. You people have kept a thing like this 9 years, and you never even learned its voice." He looked at Yuriv one more time. "Kill the pit lights if you want to help. It rests better in the dark. And keep the array off. Whatever you have to do, whatever you have to tell them, do not let them drop the goad while I'm in there." And then he lowered himself through the port and was gone into the black with the apex of the Deathworld v. Harris. And Yuriv, alone on the walkway, put both hands over his mouth to keep from crying out, and waited to hear a man die. He did not hear a man die. He heard the low call and then a long silence and then, very faint, drifting up out of the dark, the human's voice, worn smooth, murmuring. Not words Yuriv could catch. Just the shape of them, the up and down of a person talking to something in the dark the way you'd talk to a child who'd woken from a nightmare. Hey, hey, there you are, I know, it's all right. It's all right now. And under it, threaded through it, growing slower and deeper and easier breath by breath, the great beast of Harmless, making the low call back. Yuriv killed the pit lights. He found the Goderay's local cutout, a keeper's switch again, low on the wall, the kind the wardens never touched, and he threw it and jammed it with the shank of his stylus, so it could not be thrown back from the gallery. Then he sat down on the cold steel walkway with his knees up and his spines flat, and he stood the strangest watch of his life, guarding a human he'd been ordered to distrust, while that human sat in the dark below with a killer that had murdered 9 wardens, and neither of them died. And the whole terrible night the only sound in the deep pit was 2 apexes teaching each other that they did not have to be afraid. Toward morning Owen came back up through the port. There was ash-gray dust all down one side of him, and a long pale scrape on his forearm where he'd climbed something in the dark, and he looked more tired than Yuriv had ever seen him, and more at peace. "Its name is Ash," Owen said, resealing the port. "I decided tonight. On account of the color and on account of it being the last of something that burned down." He tested the lock. "You kept the array off." "I jammed it," Yuriv said. "They'll find out. In the morning when the pit crew comes, they'll see the lights and the cutout and they'll know somebody was in here." "Yeah," Owen said. He didn't seem worried. "Yeah, they will." He was right. In the morning they knew. Warden Master Kavin held the inquiry in the gallery, over the pit, so that the human would have to stand at the rail above the beast while he answered for what he'd done. It was meant as pressure. It did not work as pressure, because the moment Owen stepped up to the rail, the great gray shape below rose from its corner and crossed the floor and lay down beneath him, and made the low call, and the whole inquiry had to be conducted over the sound of a Deathworld apex expressing, to a gallery of horrified wardens, its uncomplicated joy that its human had come back. "You entered a restricted animal enclosure," Kavin said. "You broke a station guest order. You suborned a keeper, and I am given to understand, a cadet." He did not look at Yuriv when he said it, but Yuriv felt the words land on him like a boot, and understood that his life as a cadet was likely over, and found, to his own surprise, that he did not much care. "You put your own life at risk in a manner that, under treaty, this station is liable for, and you did all of it in a single night, under my guard in my house." The old warden's voice was very level. "Give me one reason I should not have you put on the next hauler out and sealed in a cell for the trip." "Because I can get your animal to eat," Owen said. The gallery went quiet. "It hasn't eaten in 6 days, Owen went on. He'd clearly had this from Brannet or from Yuriv or from the keepers who told him everything. "You've been dropping meat down the chute and it's been leaving it. You know why? Because a thing that's given up doesn't eat. It's been giving up for a while now. That's what the not moving was before I got here. That wasn't calm, that was a body running down." He put his hand on the rail, and below the beast Ash rasped its tongue against the glass beneath his palm. "But it'll eat for me, right now in front of all of you. And a thing that eats is a thing that's decided to live, and you can't file a disposal warrant on a healthy animal that's decided to live without somebody at the spire asking why. So," he looked at Kavin, mild as milk, "let me feed it. Or explain to the spire why the most valuable specimen on this station starved to death 9 days before your warrant cleared." It was, Yuriv realized, a perfect move. Not because it was clever, though it was, but because it was true, and because it forced the old warden to choose between his pride and his record. Kavin had spent 90 years building the reputation of Warden's Reach. A starved masterwork was a stain. A living one that answered a human was a different kind of stain, but a slower one, a deniable one, a one that could still, perhaps, be turned to advantage if the human could be made into a tool. Yuriv watched the calculation move behind the old warden's eyes, and hated that he could see it. "Feed it then," Kavin said. "From the gallery through the chute you do not enter the pit. I need to be where it can see me." "You will feed it from the gallery," Kavin said, "or not at all." Owen looked at him a moment. Then he shrugged easy and said, "All right," and the pit crew brought up a haunch of grazer meat on a hook and lowered it through the top chute on a line, and it swung down into the pit and hung there over the floor, dripping, exactly as it had 6 days running, ignored. Owen leaned over the rail. "Ash," he said, "just the name no Thren had ever spoken because no Thren had ever given it one. Ash, eat something for me, come on." The beast rose. It crossed to the swinging haunch. It looked up at the human at the rail, a long look, 6 amber eyes holding 2 brown ones. And then it took the meat off the hook in one motion and lay down beneath the gallery and ate, watching Owen the whole time. And the low call started up again around mouthfuls, muffled in content, and 40 wardens and a warden master stood at the rail and watched 9 years of doctrine eat out of a human's hand without the human ever leaving the gallery. "There," Owen said quietly to the beast, not to them. "There you go, good." Dreven Saul, at the far end of the rail, watched the whole thing with his beautiful dark face very still. And Yuriv, who had learned in 2 weeks to read the human like weather, had not yet learned to read the danger building in the favored sun. If he had, he might have warned somebody. He did not. After that, they could not decide what Owen was. He was not a warden. He had no standing, held no rank, had passed no drill. But the specimen Ash, the keepers had all quietly started calling it Ash, and then some of the junior cadets, and the name spread through the low corridors of the station like water finding its level. Ash would do for the human what it would do for no one else, and Ash was, whatever else it was, the most valuable and most dangerous animal on Warden's reach, and so the human who could reach it became, overnight, a problem that could not be filed. Kavin's solution was to make him useful and watched. Owen was allowed to the pit twice a day, from the gallery, always with wardens present, always for the beast's care and never for its training, and he was forbidden the floor of the cell on pain of the treaty being invoked and his removal from the station. In exchange, the disposal warrant was quietly held, not cancelled. Kavin was too careful for that, but held, pending assessment, while the old warden decided whether a tamed apex was worth more than a dead one. Owen accepted every rule and obeyed the letter of each while emptying it of meaning. Forbidden the floor, he lay flat on the gallery deck with his arm through the safety gap and let the beast press its enormous skull up against the glass beneath his hand for an hour at a time. Forbidden to train it, he simply talked to it, and the beast, which had never been trained a day in its life and never would be, learned his voice so thoroughly that it began to key on his moods, going still when he was tired, rising alert when his tone sharpened, laying its head down when he said, low and easy, all right, settle. Not commands. The wardens kept insisting they were not commands, because a command was a thing you forced, and this was plainly not forced. And so the doctrine had no word for it, and the wardens hated that most of all. It was Yuriv, of all people, who accidentally gave it a word. He had not failed out. That was its own small astonishment. He had expected, after the night on the walkway, to be stripped and shipped, and instead Kavin had assigned him permanently to the human. The same low chore, minding the treaty guest, except that now the treaty guest was the most important animal handler on the station, and the chore had quietly become the most interesting posting on the reach. Yuriv suspected the old warden had done it to have a spy. He was not entirely wrong, but Kavin had badly misjudged which way the runt would break. One evening Yuriv was on the gallery deck beside the human, watching Ash settle for the night below, when a senior warden came through on rounds and stopped and stared at the great beast lying peaceful beneath the glass, with its 6 eyes half closed, and the human's hand a finger's width away through the gap. How, the senior warden said, it was not really a question, 90 years, 9 wardens, how? And Yurev, without meaning to, without any idea he was coining the thing the whole station would be saying within a month, said, "He didn't take the fear away, sir. He never gave it any new fear. He held still and he let it be still with him. He fumbled for it. It's the grave calm." He hadn't planned the words. They just came, the way true things sometimes do, grave for the death world, grave for the stillness of it, calm for what the human carried and what the beast had caught from him. The senior warden looked at him strangely, but the phrase stuck. Within a week the keepers were using it. Within 2 the junior cadets were, out of the warden's hearing. The grave calm, the thing the human had that made the deadliest animal on the station lie down. Not dominance, not fear, not the goad or the collar cord or 90 years of doctrine, but a stillness so deep and so unafraid that even an apex could set its terror down inside it and rest. Kavin, when the phrase reached him, forbade its use, which of course guaranteed it would outlive him. Owen, when he heard it, was quiet for a moment, and then he almost smiled, and he said the only thing he ever said about it. "It's not mine, it's Marrow's, I just carry it." None of them knew who Marrow was. None of them asked. But Yurev wrote the name down that night in the margin of his drill log, so it would not be lost, and years later it would be the only word of human on the memorial the wardens would build, and nobody but Yurev would ever be able to say what it meant. On the 9th day, a beast got loose in the North Pens, and the whole station learned that the thing the human carried was not spent on one animal only. It was the scarred mother tusker, the tired, dangerous one Owen had marked on his very first walk. A feed gate failed on the night shift, or was left unlatched, and she came out into the pen yard in the dark with 3 keepers trapped on the wrong side of her, and the alarm screaming and the wardens pouring down from the barracks with goad poles and shock nets. And the doctrine did what the doctrine always did, which was to meet a frightened animal with a wall of fear. And the tusker, cornered and blazing, put her grinding jaws down and prepared to open somebody up. Owen came out of the treaty cell in his sleep clothes with his flat gray stone in one hand and no weapon at all, and he walked past the whole ring of armed wardens, under their raised poles, right up to the yellow line he had been forbidden to cross, and he crossed it. "Hold," he said, not to the beast, to the wardens, and there was that flat blade on a table edge in it that stopped even them. "All of you, poles down, lights off. You're the thing scaring her. Back up and be quiet and let me work." And because they had all, by the 9th day, seen the gallery, seen the feeding, half of them believed in the grave calm already and the other half were too rattled to argue, and the poles came down and the yard lights died, and Owen Marsh walked out alone into the dark toward a cornered mother that could take his arm off at the shoulder. And he did the only thing he ever did. He softened. He stopped a little way off where she could see him, and he sat down on the cold ground of the pen yard, and he let her watch him, not be afraid. He did not talk much. He hummed something low, some human thing with no words, and he turned the gray stone over and over in his hands, and he waited. It took most of an hour. The warden stood in the dark at the fence and watched a soft young man sit in front of a killing thing until, breath by breath, the tusker came down out of her fear, until the grinding jaws eased, and the great flat body lowered, and at last she lay down in the yard a few strides from him with a long shuddering sigh, and let the 3 trapped keepers walk out past her on shaking legs while the human hummed and did not stop. She was never trying to hurt anybody, Owen said afterward, mild, to the ring of stunned wardens, brushing the yard dust off his sleep clothes. She was trying to get away from all of you. There's a difference. There's always a difference. You just have to be willing to be the one who looks for it. Then he went back to bed. Yurev saw Driven Saul watching from the barrack stair. He had not come down with a pole. He had simply stood there in the dark and watched the human do, unarmed and half asleep, the thing that Driven Saul had trained his whole life to do with an armory and could not, and the favored son's beautiful face in the low light had gone somewhere cold and still and past reach. It was not the beast, Yurev understood later. It had never really been about the beast. It was that the human made the whole of Dreven's life look like a mistake, gently, without trying, just by being kinder and being right. And there is a certain kind of proud creature that would rather burn the world down than survive being shown a thing like that. He should have said something. He did not. He went back to his bunk, and 3 days later the spire's reply came. The reply from the spire came on the 12th day, and it did not cancel the warrant. It upgraded it. Dreven brought the news to the gallery himself, which was how Yurev knew it was bad. Dreven had spent the 11 days since the feeding growing quieter and colder, and a quiet cold Dreven was worse than a loud one. He had been raised to believe that his instincts were the finest in his cohort, and every hour that the human proved him wrong about the beast was an hour that Dreven's whole idea of himself came a little further apart. He had stopped sneering at Owen. He had started studying him, the way a duelist studies a man he has decided to kill. "The spire wants a demonstration," Dreven said. He said it to the gallery at large, but he watched the human. "They've heard the warden master's report. They don't believe a soft species treaty guest has done what 90 years of doctrine couldn't, so they're sending an assessor. And if the assessor decides the specimen isn't controlled, if he decides it's just fond of one particular human and dangerous to everyone else, then it isn't a masterwork, it's a liability, and the warrant executes on the spot." He let that sit. 6 days. The assessor arrives in 6 days. Owen was lying on the gallery deck, as he often was now, with his arm through the safety gap, and his hand resting on the warm plated brow of the beast pressed to the glass below. He did not sit up. "Controlled how?" he said. "On the floor," Dreven said. "Not through glass, not from a gallery, a warden in the pit with the beast unarmed and the beast obedient. That's control. That's what the assessor will want to see, because that's what a warden is." A thin smile. "And you're not a warden, human. You've never set foot on that floor. Warden master's own order. So when the assessor comes, someone else goes down there, a real warden. And if that beast so much as looks at him wrong, the warrant executes and your pet dies. And there's not a thing your gravecom can do about it, because you'll be up here behind the glass where you belong." It was, Yurev understood with a sick lurch, a trap built with real care. Dreven had gone to the assessment protocols and found the one rule that turned the human strength into the beast's death sentence, the rule that control meant a threat on the floor. Owen had been forbidden the floor. So the demonstration would put a stranger in the pit with Ash, and Ash, who loved exactly one person on this station and tolerated no other, would react to the stranger exactly the way an apex reacts to a threat in its den, and the assessor would write liability, and it would be finished. And Dreven would have proved at last that his instincts were right and the human's gift was a parlor trick, that a beast controlled by one soft human was not controlled at all. "Who's the warden?" Owen said. "The one who goes down." Dreven's smile widened. "I volunteered," he said. Below the glass the beast made a sound, not the low call. A different sound, low, yes, but with a burr in it, a roughness that Yurev had never heard from it, and every warden on the gallery went still, because they knew that sound even if the human didn't, because it was in the old capture logs, because it was the sound the dam had made in the ash plains of Viharis in the last hour before it killed 2 of the netting crew. Ash had lifted its head off the glass. It was looking at Dreven. Its 6 amber eyes had gone flat and fixed and terrible, and the burr rolled up out of its chest and filled the gallery, and Dreven saw, favored son, top of his cohort, finest instincts in a generation, took one involuntary step back from the rail before he caught himself. Owen put his hand flat on the glass over the beast's brow. "Ash," he said, soft. "Ash, settle, he's not worth it, settle for me." The burr stopped. Slowly, watching Dreven the whole time, the beast lowered its head back to the glass beneath the human's hand, but it did not close its eyes. It lay there with its skull under Owen's palm and its gaze locked on Dreven's saw, and it did not look away and it did not forget, and Yuriv, watching the favored son try to rebuild his composure under that unblinking amber stare, thought, "It has marked him, not as prey, as the other thing. The thing in Apex marks when something has threatened its own." Dreven left the gallery a little too quickly. Owen lay back down on the deck. He put his forehead against the glass close to the beasts, the two of them brow to brow with 3 hands' width of blast plate between, and Yuriv heard him murmur, so low it was almost nothing. "I know, buddy, I know I don't like him either, but you can't, you hear me, whatever happens, you can't, they'll use it, that's the whole game, they want you to." A long breath. "So we're going to be so calm, we're going to be the calmest thing this station has ever seen, and we're going to get you out of here." Below, the beast breathed, and did not close its eyes, and kept its watch on the empty doorway where the favored son had gone. Owen went to the warden master that night, of his own accord, and asked to be allowed on the floor. Yuriv was outside the office door and heard most of it. He had become, in these weeks, a kind of shadow to the human, no longer a spy, if he had ever really been one, but something closer to a squire or a friend, though neither of them used the word. He stood in the corridor and listened to the soft treaty guest ask the master of wardens reach for the one thing the master had sworn he'd never have. "You put a stranger in that pit," Owen said, "and something bad happens, and it's not going to be the beast's fault and it's not going to be mine, but the beast is the one that dies for it. You know that. You've handled animals your whole life, sir. You know exactly what happens when you put a wrong man in a den. So let me go down instead. Let the assessor see the truth. The truth is better than the trap." "The truth," Kavin said, "is that I have spent 90 years building a school on the principle that a Thren warden's will is the master of any beast that lives, and you are asking me to stand in front of an assessor of the spire and demonstrate that principle by sending in a human." His voice was very tired. "Do you understand what you are asking me to unmake?" "Yeah," Owen said, "I do. I'm asking you to let it be smaller than the animal for one afternoon. I know that's the hardest thing there is for a man like you, but the animal's going to die otherwise, and it didn't do anything wrong except get caught 9 years ago and refuse to stop being what it is." A pause. "You took its mother, sir. Brannett told me. You stood over its mother in the ash, and you took it in a net when it was a calf. You've had it 9 years. That's longer than a lot of fathers get. Don't let it end with you signing it away because you couldn't stand to be second to it once." There was a long silence in the office. "Get out," Kavin said at last, but there was no force in it. "Get out, human, I will think." Owen came out. He looked at Yuriv standing in the corridor pretending not to have heard, and he did not pretend either. "He's going to say no," Owen said quietly, walking. "He wants to say yes, but he's going to say no because the thing he's afraid of isn't the assessor. It's finding out he spent 90 years being wrong." He shook his head, not unkindly. "That's a hard thing to find out at the end. I feel for him, but I'm not going to let Ash pay for it." "Then what do we do?" Yuriv said, and heard himself say "we" and did not take it back. Owen stopped. He looked at the young cadet for a moment, the runt, the failure, the shadow, and something warm and steady came into his plain face. "We get ready," he said. 6 days. However this demonstration goes, it's going to come apart because they built it to come apart. So we make sure that when it does, we're the ones standing where it matters." He put a hand on Yuriv's shoulder the first time he'd ever touched him. "Can you get me the pit schematics? The old capture crew plans, the ones with the service ports and the maintenance access. Brannet'll have them. And can you find out quietly whether the top chute can pass a body my size in a hurry?" Yuriv's spines prickled. "You're going to go in on the day, whatever the warden master says." "I'm going to be ready to," Owen said. "There's a difference. A man ought to know the difference." He almost smiled. "Get me the plans, Yuriv, and get yourself somewhere safe when it starts, because I mean it, when this comes apart, it's going to come apart hard, and I don't want you anywhere near Dreven Saul when it does." The days before the assessor came were the strangest and the sweetest Yuriv would ever spend on Warden's Reach, and he did not understand until much later that this was because they were the last of a kind. Owen was on the gallery every hour he was allowed and several he was not. Word had gone all through the low corridors of the station. The keepers, the pit crew, the junior cadets who cleaned the pens, the whole invisible workforce that the wardens never saw, that the human and the beast called Ash were going to be tested by the spire, and that if the test went the way the wardens meant it to, the beast would die. And the low people, who had spent their whole working lives being ordered to fear the animals they tended, began, quietly, to take the human side. It showed in small ways. Brannett brought the schematics, rolled in a feed sack, and stayed to show Owen the old service ports with a blunt scarred claw. A pit crew woman who had lost a clutchmate to a Deathworld beast years back left, on the gallery rail one morning, a haunch of the good grazer meat, the kind reserved for the warden's own table, with no note. A junior cadet Uriv barely knew slipped him the assessor's arrival schedule down to the docking bay and the hour. None of them said anything. None of them would have admitted to anything. But the station had quietly divided, the way a station does, into the ones who kept beasts and the ones who kept doctrine, and the human belonged to the first, and so, it turned out, did most of the reach. And the beast, Ash, grew in those days into something Uriv could hardly believe he was watching. It ate now twice a day, and its ash-gray hide, which had been dull and slack, took on a deep dark luster, and the great muscles moved under it like water. It slept, truly slept, for the first time in 9 years in the dark, with the pit lights killed at Owen's insistence, and the goat array locked out on a keeper's cutout that no warden dared rearm while the human watched. And it learned the whole shape of Owen's day, so that it woke when he woke and settled when he settled and rose to the near glass the moment his boot touched the gallery deck. Every time, without fail, a mountain rising to greet a young man who had done nothing but treat it like somebody. Once, and Uriv would tell this part badly for the rest of his life, because there were no words for it, a junior cadet on the gallery dropped a tray, and the crash of it sent the whole deck flinching, and ash came up off the floor of the pit in a single explosive motion, all its terrible mass rising to a fighting crouch, 6 eyes blazing, the burr already building in its chest as it searched for the threat. And Owen, lying on the deck with his arm through the gap, did not so much as tense. He just said, all right, it's nothing, settle, in that worn smooth voice, and the beast, mid-rise, muscles bunched to kill, stopped, held, looked at the human's calm face, and lowered itself, breath by breath, back to the floor, its eyes still moving, its body coming down out of the fight because the one voice it trusted in all the world had said there was nothing to fight. The junior cadets on the gallery stood frozen against the far wall, every one of them, and stared at the human with an expression Uriv had no word for, until he was much older and understood it was reverence. You see it, Owen said to him quietly, not looking up. That right there, that's the whole thing. It'd tear this station apart if I asked it to. It never once will, because I never once will. That's not a trick, Uriv. That's just what loyalty is when you don't poison it first. He rubbed his thumb slow across the plated brow through the gap. Your warden spent 90 years trying to build a thing that obey them out of fear, and the whole time all they had to do was be somebody worth trusting. He shook his head. Fear only ever buys you the animal's body. You want the animal, you have to be worth its heart, and you can't fake that, not to a thing that can smell what you are. Below, the beast let out the low call, long and easy, and closed its 6 eyes, and slept in the dark with its human above it, 4 days before the assessor came, in the deepest peace it had known since the ash plains of the world where it was born. On the day, everything Dreven had built came due, and it came due exactly as Owen had said it would, hard and fast, and not in the shape anyone but the human had foreseen. The assessor was a cold, pale-spined Thren of the spire named Vesset, who arrived with 2 aides and a data slate, and the manner of a man who had already written most of his report on the journey out. He toured the station in an hour. He read Cavan's log with a faint curl of distaste. and he convened the demonstration in the gallery over the deep pit at the third bell, with the senior cohort ranked along the rail, and the low staff crowded at the back where they were not supposed to be, and Owen Marsh standing at the front of the gallery beside the warden master, forbidden the floor, exactly where Dreven wanted him. The claim before this office, Vesset said, without warmth, is that the Viharis apex specimen, designated a masterwork of this station, is controlled. Control is defined by protocol. A warden on the enclosure floor unarmed, the beast compliant. The specimen has an established fixation on a soft species treaty guest noted and irrelevant. A fixation is not control. A beast that obeys one keeper and kills all others is not a masterwork. It is a hazard with a favorite. He did not look at Owen when he said it, which was its own insult. The station has nominated a warden to demonstrate control. Warden Cadet Dreven saw. Step forward. Dreven stepped forward. He had dressed for it the full collar cord of a senior, the dark spines oiled, every line of him the picture of the doctrine. He looked, Yurev thought, magnificent and doomed, and did not know the second part. The specimen will be roused, Vesset said. The warden will enter the floor. He will bring the beast to heel by voice and presence alone, as a warden does. If the beast submits, the masterwork stands. He glanced, finally, at Owen. If it does not, the standing warrant executes, and the hazard is disposed of before it can take a 10th warden. Begin. The winch brains woke the pit. The lights came up harsh and white, the way they had for 9 years, and the alarm chimed its patient chime, and the goat array descended from the ceiling in a ring of articulated arms, blue fire crawling along the lance tips. Down on the floor in the sudden glare, the beast came awake. It came awake wrong. Yurev saw it in the first second, saw the difference between the animal that had learned to sleep in the dark under Owen's watch, and this animal, dragged up out of that peace into the old glare, and the old alarm and the old blue fire. All the fear the human had spent 3 weeks draining out of it flooding back at once. Ash rose to a crouch, 6 eyes wide and white-rimmed, and the burr came up out of its chest, and it swung its great skull toward the gallery, searching for the one face that meant it was all right. It found Owen. It steadied a fraction, a breath, the burr dropping half a register as it fixed on the human at the rail, and then the floor hatch cycled open, and Dreven Saul stepped out onto the floor of the pit. The burr came back doubled. Compliance by voice and presence, Vesset recited, watching his slate. Proceed, warden. Dreven proceeded. Yurev had to give him that much. He was not a coward. He walked out onto the floor of the deep pit toward the apex of Viharis with his spines flared and his collar cord bright and the whole weight of the doctrine in his stride. And he lifted one claw and pointed at the ground and spoke the word that had broken 1,000 beasts on this station. Down. The beast did not go down. The beast lowered its head, and its shoulders bunched, and it took a slow step toward Dreven Saul, and every warden on the gallery who knew the capture logs made the same small sound at once, because this was it. This was the sound and the stance from the ash plains. This was the last minute before the dam killed the netting crew. Down, Dreven said again, and his voice cracked on it just slightly, just enough, and the beast heard the crack, the way it heard everything, and it knew what the crack meant, because fear has a sound and an apex is built to hear it. It took another step. The blue fire of the goat array crackled overhead. Dreven's claw was trembling now, and he was too proud to lower it, and Yurev understood with sick clarity that the favored son was about to die for his own trap, and that the moment he did, the warrant would execute, and Ash would die too, and Dreven had built it all himself and could not now unbuild it. Execute the warrant, Vesset said, flat, already writing. The specimen is non-compliant, gasped the. No, Owen said. He was already moving. He had been moving, Yurev realized, since before the hatch opened, had drifted, in the confusion, from the warden master's side toward the gallery's end, toward the maintenance stair, and now He went up it 2 treads at a time with the schematics 3 weeks in his memory, and he was through the old service port at the top of the cell before anyone on the gallery had finished turning to look. "Human," Cavan's voice cracking like Dreven's had cracked, "you are forbidden the—" Owen dropped through the port. He did not fall. He caught the old capture crew's equipment rail. The pale scrape on his forearm was from learning exactly this, 3 weeks ago in the dark, and he swung down it hand over hand and dropped the last body length to the floor of the deep pit, landing easy, knees bent, in the harsh white light, between the trembling warden and the rising beast. And he turned his back on Ash. That was the thing no warden on that gallery would ever forget, the thing that would be argued over for years in the low corridors and never once make it into the official log. The human landed on the floor of the pit with the apex of V. Harris a body length behind him, its jaws parted, its burr filling the whole cell, and he turned his back on it. He faced Dreven Saul. He put himself between the killing thing and the man it was about to kill, with his soft, unarmored back to the beast, and he did not so much as glance over his shoulder, because he knew, the way you know your own name, that the danger in that room was not behind him. "Ash," he said, not loud. It carried anyway, the whole cell had gone silent to hear it. "Ash, I'm here, settle." The burr stopped. Uriv at the rail watched the beast come down out of the kill. It happened the way it always happened, and it never stopped being the most astonishing thing he had ever seen. The great muscles unbunching, the white leaving the rims of the 6 amber eyes, the skull lowering, not in submission, never in submission, but in ease, in the bone-deep relief of a thing that has been alone and afraid and is neither any more. Ash crossed the last of the floor and pressed its enormous brow against the human's back, gently, a mountain leaning down, and made the low call, and the sound of it filled the deep pit where 9 wardens had died, and up on the gallery the assessor of the spire stopped writing. Owen reached back without looking and laid his hand flat on the great plated jaw beside his shoulder. "Good," he murmured. "That's my good boy." "That's it." Then he looked at Dreven, who stood frozen a few feet away with his claw still half raised and his whole face come apart. "Put your hand down," Owen said quietly. "It's over. You can put your hand down now." "You," Dreven's voice was barely a voice. "You're on the floor. You're not a warden. You have no—" "I know," Owen said. "I know I'm not. That's kind of the point, isn't it?" He was still gentle. He was always gentle. That was what none of them ever understood about him until it was far too late. Your whole life somebody told you the way to hold a thing like this was to be bigger and louder and meaner than it. And you're standing in front of the proof that they were wrong, and it's breaking something in you, and I'm sorry for that, I really am. But look at it. Behind him, Ash pressed its brow harder against his back and rumbled. "Look at what it does for me. And then ask yourself, honest, one time in your life, what did you ever do for it except make it afraid?" For one moment, Uriv would swear to this for the rest of his life, and no one would believe him. For one moment something moved in Dreven Saul's beautiful ruined face that might have been the beginning of understanding. And then the assessor said from the gallery in his cold, flat voice, "Fascinating. The specimen is controlled by the human and no other, which is precisely the definition of a hazard with a favorite and precisely why the warrant stands." A pause. "Warden Dreven, you are on the floor and armed. The specimen is distracted. Execute the disposal manually. Now, while it is calm, put the lance through the base of its skull. Prove the doctrine, or the record shows a warden who would not." And Uriv saw the thing crystallize in Dreven's face, saw the ruined pride reach for the one thing that could make it whole again, the one thing the assessor had just handed him. Not the beast's submission, which he could not have, but the beast's death, which he could. Kill the thing that had shown him up. Kill it while it was gentled, while it was leaning trusting against the human who had beaten him, and be, at the last, the warden who did what the soft human could not. Dreven's trembling claw closed on the gold lance's kill setting. His arm came up. "Dreven, don't," Cavan started, on his feet now at the rail, and it was the first time in 90 years the warden master's voice had held anything like a plea, and it came far, far too late. Dreven lunged, not at the beast, at Owen. Because Dreven Saul's finest instincts, the instincts he had been so proud of his whole life, had told him the true thing at last, that the way to kill the beast was to kill the human, that Ash gentled was Ash undefended, that the lever that moved the apex was the soft young man with his hand on its jaw. And so the favored son drove the blue fire of the goad lance not at the animal, but at the man who stood between them, at Owen's turned and unarmored back. What happened next happened faster than the gallery could hold, and off the edge of what any of them could bear to look at, and Uriv only ever let himself remember it in pieces. The lance caught Owen high on the shoulder as he turned. He was already turning. He had heard the shift in Dreven's feet, but a human cannot turn faster than a Thren can lunge. And the blue fire took him and dropped him, and he went down on the floor of the deep pit hard and did not get up. And the beast that had let 9 wardens die in that pit, the beast that Owen Marsh had spent 3 weeks teaching that it never had to be afraid or angry again, saw its human struck down in front of it. Uriv turned away. He could not watch, and there was in the end almost nothing to watch. It was that fast. He heard the gallery scream, all of it at once, 40 wardens and the low staff and the assessor's aides. He heard the sound the beast made, and it was not the low call and it was not the burr. It was a sound from the ash plains of a dead world, a sound that predated the station and the doctrine and the Thren themselves, the sound the last apex of Viharis had been built across 1,000,000 years to make exactly once, when the thing it loved was harmed in front of it. And then he heard the sound stop, very quickly, and after that the deep pit was quiet. When Uriv made himself look, Dreven Saul was gone from where he had stood, and the goad lance lay on the floor of the pit dark and broken, and the gallery had fallen into a silence deeper than any warden's reach had ever held. He did not look for Dreven. Nobody, in the years after, ever said aloud what there was to find, and the log recorded only that Warden Cadet Saul had died in the line of a demonstration he himself had structured, which was true, and which was the kindest thing the truth would allow. And in the center of the floor of the deep pit, the apex of the Deathworld Viharis stood over the fallen human with its 4 feet planted around him like the pillars of a house, its great head lowered, its whole terrible body curved into a shield. And it was not roaring now. It was making the low call, over and over, soft and desperate, pressing its brow to the young man's chest, telling him the only thing it knew how to tell him. Wake up, I'm here, please, I'm here. For a long time nobody on the gallery moved, because there was nothing anyone could do. Owen Marsh lay on the floor of the deep pit, and he was breathing. Uriv could see it, the small rise and fall of the human's chest, shallow and too fast but there, and the apex of Viharis stood over him and would let no one near. That was the horror of it, the thing that turned the warden's triumph to ash in their mouths in the first minute. The human was alive, and hurt, and needed help that only the gallery could give, and between the human and the gallery stood 8 tons of grief that had just killed the last thing that came near its person. The floor hatch cycled, a junior warden, brave or panicked, trying to bring a med litter through, and ash came off Owen's body in a single motion and slammed its full mass against the hatch and drove it shut, and stood over the human again, and made the low call, and its 6 eyes swept the gallery once slow, and every warden there understood the thing it was telling them. No one comes near him. No one comes near him again ever as long as I live. Gas the pit, the assessor said. His cold voice had a thread in it now, the first crack Uriv had heard in it. Gas it, put the beast down and recover the gas takes 4 minutes to drop a specimen that size, Kavin said. He was gripping the rail with both claws. The human is unshielded. The same gas will kill him in 1. He did not look away from the pit. You will not gas my pit. Then the human is already. The human is breathing, Kavin said, and there was iron back in his voice. the iron of a man who has finally, at the very end, found the thing he should have stood on all along. And I have spent 90 years learning that there is always a way into a beast if you are willing to stop being afraid of it long enough to find the door. Be quiet, assessor. Be quiet and let a warden work. He turned from the rail. His old eyes found Uriv, the runt, the failure, the human's shadow, and held him. You, Kavin said, you have been with him, every hour. The beast has seen you at his side more than any living Thren. Yes. Uriv's mouth was dry as the ash plains. Yes, Warden Master. Then you know what it does, Kavin said. You have watched it closer than I have. So you will tell me true, Cadet, and our human's life turns on it. Is there any world in which that animal lets you onto that floor? Uriv looked down into the pit, at the beast standing guard, at the human, small and still beneath it, at the 6 amber eyes that had swept the gallery and marked every Thren in it as an enemy. And he thought about 3 weeks of gallery evenings, about a dropped tray and a beast coming up out of a killing crouch because a voice it trusted said settle, about the human saying, you see it, that right there, that's the whole thing, about the low call and the dark and the word ash, and a young man who had walked onto the floor of a killing pit and turned his back on the apex of a dead world because he knew, the way you know your own name, where the danger really was. It won't let me on the floor, Uriv said slowly. It won't let anyone on the floor, not while he's down, he swallowed, but it might let me talk to it from the port the way he does. He looked up at the old warden, and for the first time in his life the run of the cohort did not feel small. It knows my voice, not the way it knows his, but it knows it, and it knows I'm his. He was already moving toward the maintenance stair. I have to be where it can see me. And you have to keep everyone else away, everyone, Warden Master. No wardens, no goad, no gas, or it'll close up around him and will never get near. He told me that. He told me weeks ago. The way in is to stop being a threat. Kavin looked at the cadet for one long moment. Go, he said. And Cadet, Uriv paused on the stair. The old warden's face was a ruin of 90 years coming down at once. Do it the way he would, not the way I taught you. The way he would. Uriv climbed to the service port at the top of the cell. The port Owen had opened 3 weeks ago in the dark, and he lay down flat on the steel walkway, the way he had watched the human lie flat on the gallery 100 times, and he put his head and one arm through the gap, down into the harsh white light, and he made his undersized spines lie flat, and his voice go low and worn smooth, and he called down to the apex of the Deathworld Harmless, the way a runt calls to a mountain. Ash, Uriv said. Ash, it's me. It's you know me. I'm his. Ash, look up here, look at me. The beast looked up. Its 6 eyes found the small Thren hanging out of the port, and the burr came up out of its chest, low and warning, and Uriv's whole body screamed at him to pull back and run. He did not pull back. He thought of Owen turning his back on the killing thing, and he held his ground in the port, and he kept his voice low. And he did the hardest thing a Thren of Warden's reach had ever been asked to do, which was to be unafraid on purpose in front of a grieving apex. I know, Uriv said. I know, somebody hurt him, I know, it wasn't me, I'd never, you've seen me. 3 weeks, Ash, you've seen me right there beside him every day, and I never once hurt him, and I never once hurt you. The burr wavered. He needs help, you know he does. You can feel it, his breathing's wrong, you can feel it against your face. He needs the ones up here to help him, and they can't while you won't let them near. But you'll let me talk, won't you? Because I'm his, because he'd want you to hear me. Uriv's voice cracked, and he let it because the human had taught him without ever saying so that you did not have to be strong for an animal, you only had to be honest. Please, please, Ash, let us help him. He's not gone. He's not marrow yet. Let us keep him. He did not know why he said the name. He had written it in his drill log weeks ago and not known what it meant. But it came out of him now, the human's word, the word for the guardian beast that had died old in the sun in a yard on a world none of them would ever see. And whether it was the name or the voice or the 3 weeks or the honest broken sound of it, the beast heard something in it, and the burr stopped. Ash lowered its head. It pressed its brow to Owen's chest one more time and made the low call soft as Uriv had ever heard it. And then slowly, watching the port, watching the small, honest Thren who was his human's own, it took one step back from the fallen man. And then another. It did not leave him. It would never, in the whole rest of its long life, be more than a few strides from him again. But it opened, by 3 slow steps, a space beside the human's body just wide enough for a med litter and 2 frightened keepers. And it stood at the edge of that space with its head lowered, and it let them in. "Now," Uriv said hoarse, not lifting his head from the port. "Now quiet, no wardens, keepers only, Brannet, you and one other, slow, hands where it can see them, and you talk to it the whole way. You tell it what you're doing, you never once stop talking, go now." They went. Old Brannet of the West Pens and a pit crew woman who had left good meat on the rail with no note, the 2 lowest people on the station, walked out onto the floor of the deep pit where 9 wardens had died, and knelt beside the human with their scarred hands open and visible, and never once stopped talking low to the beast that stood a body length away, and watched them touch its person, and did not move, because a small honest voice from the port had told it they were his. And because the last apex of a dead world had learned, in 3 weeks, from a soft young man, the one thing 90 years of doctrine had never taught it, that not every hand that comes toward you in the dark is a hand that means you harm. They got Owen onto the litter. They carried him up out of the pit through the floor hatch, slow, talking the whole way, and the beast paced them to the edge of its reach and stopped at the hatch and put its brow to the closing door and made the low call after him, again and again, until the door sealed and he was gone up into the station where it could not follow. And then the apex of Viharis lay down in the center of the deep pit, in the place where the human had fallen, and put its great head down on its forefeet, and waited, the way it had waited every day for 3 weeks, the way it would go on waiting for its person to come back. Owen Marsh did not die, though it was 3 days before the station medics would say so with any confidence, and in those 3 days Warden's reach came apart and put itself back together into something it had never been before. Uriv learned most of it second-hand, because he spent those 3 days at the deep pit. Somebody had to. That was the plain fact of it, and everyone knew it, and no warden would say it. The beast would not eat, would not settle, would not sleep, and paced the floor of the pit calling for the human it had lost, and if it worked itself up into grief past a certain point, there was no telling what 8 tons of it might do to a station that had spent 9 years teaching it to expect the worst. Only one thing calmed it. A small, honest voice from the service port telling it the truth. "He's alive, Ash. He's up above us 2 decks up, sleeping. He's hurt bad, but the medics say he'll wake. I'm not lying to you. You'd know if I was lying. He's coming back." So Uriv lived at the port for 3 days and slept in snatches on the steel walkway, and talked a grieving apex through the longest wait of its life. And the wardens, who could not do it, who had never once been able to do it, brought him food and blankets and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The run of the cohort had become, without anyone deciding it, the second keeper of the beast called Ash. And the doctrine of Warden's reach, the thing 90 years and 9 dead wardens had been built to prove, lay quietly in pieces at the bottom of the deep pit, and everyone stepped around it, and no one spoke of it, and it did not get up again. The assessor of the spire, Vesset, spent those 3 days in the warden master's office writing, and rewriting a report he could not make come out the way he had come to make it. Uriv was not in the room for that, but old Brannet was, more than once, bringing the wardens their meals, and Brannet told it later in the West Pens the way the low people told all the things the wardens thought they hadn't seen. The assessor had come to prove the human's gift was a fixation and the beast a hazard. But protocol defined control as a warden on the floor, unarmed, the beast compliant by voice and presence alone, and a full gallery. A warden master and 2 spire aides had watched a soft species treaty guest stand on the floor of the deep pit, unarmed, his back turned, and bring the apex of Viharis down out of a kill with a single word. That was control. That was the purest demonstration of control in the 90-year history of the station. It simply was not control by a threat. And there was the second thing, the thing Vesset could not right around no matter how he tried. The beast had not harmed the human. The beast had not harmed the keepers who touched the human. The beast had killed exactly one creature in 3 weeks, and it had killed him in the half-second after he drove a kill lance into the back of the one being on the station it loved. Every warden the specimen had ever killed, Brannett pointed out, mild and deadly, to a room that did not want to hear it, every single one across 9 years had died with a goad in their hand. The animal had never once killed a thing that came to it in peace. Not once. The doctrine had called that murder for 9 years. It had never been murder. It had been an animal defending itself from the only thing that ever hurt it, which was them. "So what's your assessor going to write?" Brannett had said to the office, to the warden master, to the cold, pale-spined man from the spire. He was a keeper. He had no standing. He said it anyway. "Going to write that the safest place on this station is next to the beast, long as you come to it clean. Going to write that 90 years of your doctrine got 9 wardens killed for nothing. Or you going to write the truth, which is worse, that a boy with a rock in his pocket walked in here, and in 3 weeks did the thing you spent your whole life swearing couldn't be done, and did it by being kind." The room, Brannett said, had been very quiet. Owen woke on the 3rd day, and the first thing he said, before his eyes were even properly open, was the beast's name. Uriv was not there for it. He was at the port, 2 decks down, doing the work only he could do. But a junior medic was there, and she told it after because it was the kind of thing you tell. How the human had come up out of the deep dark all at once, the way the badly hurt sometimes do, and his hand had closed on the medic's sleeve, and the first word out of him, cracked and urgent, before pain, before where am I, before anything, was, "Ash. Where's Ash? Is he all right? Did they hurt him?" And when the medic had said the beast was unharmed, that it was in the pit, that it was waiting for him, the human had let go of her sleeve and closed his eyes, and the whole ruined tension had gone out of him. And he'd said, so quietly she almost missed it, "Good, okay. Good boy, hang on, I'm coming." They tried to keep him in the bed. He let them for half a day because he was not a fool and he knew a torn shoulder and a burned back needed time. But by the evening of the 3rd day, he was on his feet with one arm strapped to his chest, moving slow and gray-faced down through the station toward the deep pit, and no warden on Warden's Reach tried to stop him, because there was not a warden left on Warden's Reach who did not understand, by then, exactly what he was. He came out onto the gallery, and down in the pit, the beast that had not eaten in 3 days, that had paced and grieved and called for him without rest, came up off the floor in one great surge of ash-gray muscle, and crossed the cell and reared up against the blast glass beneath him, 6 eyes blazing, the low call pouring up out of it in a flood, a mountain trying with its whole heart to climb 3 hands' width of plate to reach the one person in all the world. "Hey," Owen said, his voice broke on it. He got down on his knees at the rail, slow, one-armed, and put his palm flat on the glass. "Hey, buddy, there you are, I know, I'm sorry I scared you, I'm here. I'm here now." Below, the beast pressed its whole face to the glass under his hand and made the low call and shuddered with it, and the young man knelt there with tears on his plain, ordinary face and his hand on the glass and said it over and over, the smallest words there are, the only ones that ever mattered. "Good boy, I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. I've got you." And the whole gallery of wardens stood behind him and watched the apex of the Deathworld Viharis weep against the glass for joy. And not one of them, not one, would ever again be able to stand at that rail and believe the thing they had been taught. Warden Master Cavan came and stood beside the kneeling human. He watched the beast a long time. When he spoke, it was not to Owen, not exactly. It was to the animal and to the ash plains 9 years gone, and to himself. "I stood over its mother," Cavan said. "Did you know that, in the ash? The greatest thing that world ever made, and I stood over it when it was dead, and I felt proud." His old voice was very quiet, And I took the calf in a net and I brought it here and I spent 9 years trying to make it kneel and it never did and I told myself that was its wildness, its defect. He watched the beast press its face to the human's hand. It wasn't a defect. It was the last true thing in this whole station. It was waiting 9 years for someone to come who wasn't its enemy. And I made sure, every single day, with every light and every alarm and every goad, that no such person ever could. He closed his eyes. You walked in with a rock in your pocket and you undid 90 years of me in 3 weeks, human, and the worst of it, the thing I will carry is that it was so simple. It was the simplest thing in the world. And I could not see it, because I had built my whole life on not being able to see it. It's not too late, Owen said. He did not look up from the glass. That's the thing about animals, sir. They don't hold the past against you the way people do. You could go down there right now, clean, no goad, hands open, and just sit, a little way off. Let it watch you, not be afraid. He almost smiled through the tears. Take about 2 hours, probably. It's a hard case, but it'd learn you. They always learn you if you let them, if you're willing to be the one who doesn't add to it. Kevin looked down at the beast for a long moment. Perhaps, he said, perhaps I will, when I have earned the standing too. He straightened, and something settled in the old warden's ruined face, a decision coming down like a weight finding its floor. But first I have a report to sign, and a school to burn down to the ground so that something better can be built where it stood. The assessor Vesset left on the 5th day, and he left having written the truth, because in the end Kavin gave him no other choice. The old warden did it in the gallery, in front of the ranked cohort and the low staff both, which was itself a breaking of every protocol the station had. He stood at the rail above the pit where the human knelt with his hand on the glass, and he spoke to the assessor of the spire in a voice built to carry to the back of the deck. You came to certify a masterwork, Kavin said. You will not, because there is no masterwork. There never was. There was a captured animal and 90 years of cruelty we called doctrine, and it got 9 of my wardens killed, and it would have gotten a 10th killed last week if a human had not walked onto that floor and shown us all what we were. He did not flinch from it. Yuriv, watching, understood that this was the bravest thing he would ever see a Thren do, braver than any reckoning, because there was no beast in it, only a proud old man dismantling himself in front of everyone he had ever led. Write it, assessor. Write that the Vihara specimen is not controlled by a warden and never will be, because it cannot be controlled, only known. Write that it is safe, safer than any beast on this station, safe as a stone to anyone who comes to it in peace, and death itself to anyone who brings it harm, and that this is not a defect but the plainest justice there is. Write that the disposal warrant is void, on my authority, over my seal, and that if the spire wishes to argue the point it may send someone to take the animal from the human by force, and I will stand at the human side when they try, and so, I think, will every keeper on this reach. A pause. And write one more thing. Write that warden's reach will no longer break beasts. From this day it keeps them. We will learn the thing the human knows, or we will close our doors. Because a school that teaches cruelty and calls it mastery has no business wearing the name of wardens, and I would rather end 90 years of it than add one more name to that wall. The assessor Vesset looked at the old warden for a long, cold moment. He was a creature of the spire and the doctrine to the marrow, and everything in him wanted to write hazard and warrant and defiance, and let the spire's disciplinarians settle it. But he had stood at that rail. He had seen the human turn his back on the killing thing. He had seen the beast come down out of the kill at a single soft word, and weep against the glass for joy at the sight of a young man's face, and let 2 frightened keepers carry its person to safety, because a small honest voice had told it they were friends. He had come to prove that kindness was a trick and strength was the only master. And some cold, honest thing at the bottom of him, something the doctrine had never quite killed, would not let him write the lie. The warrant is void, Vesset said at last. Each word cost him. The specimen is reclassified, not masterwork. Ward. He turned the strange, soft word over as if it tasted of nothing he knew. A being under the protection of this station rather than its control. I will note the warden master's reforms as within his authority. He gathered his slate and his aids, and at the lift he paused and looked back one time at the human kneeling at the rail with his hand on the glass, and the apex of a dead world pressed adoring beneath it. And something moved in the assessor's cold face that he did not have a name for and would spend the flight home pretending he had not felt. 90 years, he said, to no one. And it was only ever that simple. Then the lift took him, and he was gone, and Warden's reach was free to become the thing the human had accidentally made it. They did not put Ash back in the deep pit. That was the first thing, and Owen made it a condition of everything else, in the mild, unbreakable way he had. The deep pit had been 9 years of the beast's suffering, and he would not let it be 1 hour more. So the keepers, led now openly by Brannet and by the runt cadet Uriv, who had been quietly reassigned by the warden master's own hand from the warrior track to a track that did not yet have a name, opened the great enclosure onto the station's tamed north shelf, a broad, cold expanse of rock and hardy scrub under the shielded sky, the nearest thing on Warden's reach to the ash plains of a home the beast would never see again. They killed the harsh lights forever. They pulled the goat array out of the ceiling and broke it up for scrap, and the pit crew woman who had left the good meat took a piece of a shock lance home to her bunk and kept it, she said, to remember what they used to be. And Ash walked out of the deep pit under its own power for the first time in 9 years, into open air and dim cold light and the smell of scrub, with the human at its side, one-armed, gray-faced, walking slow, his good hand resting on the great plated shoulder, and it did not run, and it did not rage, and it did not try, even once, to test the shelf's far fences for a way back to a wild that was a galaxy and a lifetime gone. It stayed at the human's side. It would always stay at the human's side. That was the whole of what it wanted, and it had spent 9 years in a bright, loud pit learning to believe it would never have it, and now it had it, and it was not going to waste 1 hour of the having. The wardens came to watch, in those first days, from the shelf's edge. They could not help it. The thing they had spent their careers fearing walked loose now under the open sky, and it should have been the most dangerous hour in the station's history, and instead it was the most peaceful, because the beast paid the wardens no mind at all. It had exactly one concern in the world, and he was walking slow beside it with his arms strapped to his chest, and as long as he was near, nothing else on Warden's reach was worth so much as a glance. A junior cadet, greatly daring, came too near one afternoon while Owen dozed against the beast's flank in the wan sun, and Ash lifted its head and fixed the cadet with 6 flat amber eyes and let the burr build 1 notch in its chest, and Owen, without waking, without opening his eyes, murmured, "Easy. He's all right." Settle, and the beast settled, and put its head back down, and the cadet walked away on shaking legs, having witnessed the plainest demonstration of the thing they were all, slowly, beginning to call by Uriv's name for it. The grave calm. It went into the station's new teaching that season, the first entry in a doctrine that was the unwriting of a doctrine, not a technique. The keepers were always careful to say, because it could not be taught as a technique, only pointed at and practiced toward. The grave calm, the stillness a keeper carries into the presence of a dangerous thing, the refusal to add 1 gram of fear to a creature the world has already filled with it, the willingness to be, on purpose, unafraid, so that the beast in time can set its terror down inside your quiet and rest. They wrote it down as best they could. They knew the writing was a shadow of the thing. But they wrote it so it would not be lost, and at the head of the first page, where a proud school would have put the name of a founder, they put instead, at Uriv's insistence and over no objection at all, a single human word that none of them could translate and all of them had come to understand. Marrow. Owen told them once what it meant. He was mending by then, the strapping off his arm, the gray gone from his face, and he sat with Uriv and Brannet on the north shelf in the wan light with the great beast asleep and rumbling against his back, and he told them about a mean old guardian bull scarred all up one side, and a boy of 11 sitting down in the snow a little way off, and 2 hours of being unafraid on purpose, and a wire coming loose. He died in the sun in the yard, Owen said, old, 9 years after, and he never turned on a person again, not once, and I never forgot it. That you don't break a broken thing by being alive to it. You just have to be the one who doesn't add to it. He reached back and laid his good hand on the sleeping apex's flank. I carried a rock from where he died halfway across the galaxy because I wanted to keep for something. And then I got here, and I met the loneliest animal I ever saw in my life, and I understood what I'd carried it for. He never went home. There was nothing to go back to that could hold him now, and everything on Warden's reach that needed him. A station learning to unbreak itself. A runt cadet becoming the finest keeper the frontier would ever produce. A proud old warden who did, in the end, go down onto the shelf one gray afternoon and sit a little way off and let the beast learn him, and wept when it finally lowered its great head to his open, empty hand. And an apex of a dead world, the last of its kind, who had waited 9 years in a bright pit for someone to come who was not its enemy, and had found instead someone who was its own. They stayed together the rest of their long lives, the young man and the beast, and it is the beast the frontier still tells stories about, out on the cold edge of the Thren worlds, where the wardens keep their charges kindly now and break nothing. The great ash-gray shadow that walked at the human side, and would let a child pull its ears, and would kill a galaxy to keep him safe, and answered, at the very end of everything, to nothing louder than a worn, smooth voice in the dark saying the smallest words there are. Easy, buddy, I've got you, there you are.